Hi there, it's February the 17th. We continue our journey through Mark's Gospel, and we're going from chapter 2 verse 13 and through to chapter 3 verse 6. There's a series of stories here about Jesus having encounters, having face-offs with the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. These are those who have taken the Torah, they've taken the basic instruction of God, the directions for life that God gives, and they've embellished them, and they've kind of put fences round them, and they've tried to make themselves the guardians of that Torah, of that law, by adding lots of different things to it. Now, the first thing we read here is of Jesus going along the street and calling Matthew, the tax collector, Matthew Levi. Now, a tax collector in these times was someone who was really beyond the pale, because they were cooperators, they were collaborators with the Roman army, with the Roman power, and the Romans basically wanted their money in for their taxes, so they farmed this out to locals who would then gather in really what they wanted to charge, and they were backed up by the might of the Roman army. So as a result, these tax collectors became very unpopular with the locals, because they were basically fellow Jews here who were raking it in, making a living off the back of the misery of imposing taxes for an occupying army. But Jesus calls Matthew to him, and Matthew just gets up and follows him. Something about Jesus draws him. Not only that, but they go to the house of Matthew, and other tax collectors and sinful people who are maybe not the sparkling examples that the Pharisees would like to be, they come, and Jesus teaches them, and he spends time with them, and he blesses them. And the Pharisees are appalled at this, because Jesus is hanging out with all the wrong people. But Jesus says, but wait a minute, it's the sinners, it's those who are broken, it's those who are in need, it's those who have failed, who need the doctor, not the healthy, and that's what I've come for. And then there's a continued interaction with the Pharisees on the question of fasting, not only with the Pharisees but also John's disciples, those who've been following John the Baptist. There's a question here about fasting. Now, fasting, interestingly, under the law is not prescribed very often. Actually, there's a fast around the Day of Atonement that's prescribed, but no other fasting is really prescribed as such by the law. It's something that is done voluntarily. But the Pharisees had a system of fasting in place, and therefore they say, Jesus, why aren't you following our system? Why aren't you following our traditions of fasting? Jesus simply says, hey, it's party time. The bridegroom is here. Why would people want to fast and do those kind of things when they can enjoy the benefits of the king being around them? There will come a day when they fast voluntarily, but there's no imposition of fasting on these people, no system of fasting at the moment. Similarly, his disciples are walking through the fields, and they're taking ears of grain, of barley or wheat, and they're rubbing them in their hands to get the lovely glutinous flour out of them, and this is considered by the Pharisees as work. Now, the Pharisees and the scribes, the keepers of the law, had whole rafts of legislation about what was and wasn't work on the Sabbath, on the Saturday. And here they are homing in on this fact that what the disciples are doing here is work. And Jesus says, I am the Lord of the Sabbath. I am the one who oversees the Sabbath. The Sabbath is not made for man, the man is not made for the Sabbath, but Sabbath is made for man. It's made for his benefit. It's something that's meant to benefit him. It's not something that enslaves man or makes him obey. And Jesus again counters their additional traditions, the things that they fenced it round with, and takes away this human tradition. And lastly, Jesus goes into a synagogue on the Sabbath. People are gathering there in the synagogue, and there's a man there with a withered hand, and there's a big question here. Is Jesus going to heal on the Sabbath? Because amazingly, healing was seen as being work. To make someone whole, to restore someone, was seen as actually engaging in labour. And Jesus questions this. He says, surely it is not wrong to do good on the Sabbath. And he tells this man to stretch out his hand. But on the basis of this action, on the basis of his teachings, these Pharisees and these teachers of the law want to destroy Jesus. They want to do away with him. How terrible that they can't see the blessings that Jesus is bringing, and they're so tied down to their own traditions. But you know, it's so easy to become enmeshed in our own traditions, our own way of thinking that we're pleasing God, not realizing that God's heart is for those who are broken, those who have need of a rescuer. God's heart is to set us free from the laws and traditions that we would bind ourselves by, the regulations that make us look religious. Jesus is not interested in that. He's interested in relationship. And today we want to deepen that relationship with him. Have a very good February the 17th.